Emily Mlynek. I'm a volunteer with Woman to Woman. I do a lot of stuff on the back end for Woman to Woman, but primarily I host our book club, which meets at the end of the month every month. Very excited to be here joining the weekly support group for a very special reason. I think, many of you already know Cynthia, and Carly has outlined it so well, but we have Cynthia Hayes here, and we're going to talk about The Big Ordeal, which is her new book that she has just been released. A lot of you know, yes, Nancy has a copy. I love it. A lot of you know Cynthia already, and Carly has given us a great background, but I think there's not enough. We can keep talking about how interesting and great you are, Cynthia. So I will say, you are a former freelance journalist. You are a marketing executive. After receiving your MBA from Harvard Business School, you spent over 30 years as a management consultant, and you've also been an adjunct professor at NYU. You are now turning your attention to writing. You've produced this wonderful book that I think is such a resource for patients, and really is highlighting you as a patient advocate and such a resource in this community. So there's so much for us to discuss. Very excited to have you here. Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you for joining me on the virtual stage today.
Well, thank you so much. This is such a pleasure.
This will be fun. So a little note of housekeeping. Cynthia and I have prepared a couple discussion points, and like Carly said, we'll do Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, we would love to hear from you, but I'll give you the cue of when to unmute and when is the right time to chime in. So Cynthia, just to start us off, I think, like I said, you've got such an interesting background that has brought you to this place, but just, to hear from you, can you tell us a little about yourself and kind of how you've arrived in this place?
Well, cancer comes out of the blue for all of us. And I think that, I had been working, at Montefiore Medical Center, and I enjoy the healthcare field, and it was a fascinating time for me to take all of my experience as a marketing executive and a teacher, a trainer, and put that together in a healthcare environment. And I loved my work. But having worked for myself for as many years as I did, at some point I felt that itch to go back to working on my own. And I had just left Montefiore when I flunked my pap smear. Nobody flunks a pap smear. So when I got the phone call from my gynecologist saying, Cynthia, I don't like what I'm seeing here. There's some blah, blah, blah cells. You need to come in for more testing. I instantly, my first reaction was, oh, it's nothing. But then, I'm a consummate researcher. I started Googling, well, what are those blah, blah, blah cells that she said she saw on my pap smear?
The pedicure chair, right? I think you said you're getting your nails done.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Exactly. And that's when I panicked. And I was so surprised throughout, my cancer experience with how little conversation there was about the emotional ramifications of a cancer diagnosis. And the more I spoke with other patients after the fact, the more I realized that there is a vast common experience, that cancer is in fact emotional. And I wanted to understand why, and I wanted to increase the conversation around that, because even though my doctors founded Women to Women, they didn't mention Women to Women to me until long after I had finished my treatment. And I think it's just so typical of us that we think we have to rise to the challenge of cancer and put a positive spin on it and be brave, that we don't allow ourselves to show the weakness that we're actually feeling, the fear and the anxiety and the depression, because we judge ourselves so harshly for it. And so therefore we don't communicate with our medical care team that we have these other needs, and that whole lack of conversation just needs to go away. We need to be open and conversive about this, and share that it is an emotional experience.
Absolutely. I think that is exactly what this book is doing, is it's opening a door for more conversation. I think it gives people tools to start, exploring that themselves. So I too am a marketing person, so I'm going to be sure to shill the book a little bit for you here. But can you give us your elevator pitch on The Big Ordeal and tell us what it's about?
Sure. I think it's really about three things. One is helping people understand why they feel the way they do, and reassuring cancer patients and loving caregivers everywhere that it is perfectly normal to have an emotional roller coaster ride, and to understand sort of what that ride looks like for most people. And then most importantly, it's to help people learn how to cope with it all. And I think being able to cope starts with a recognition that what you're experiencing is not a sign of weakness. It's not a judgment about you and your personality. What you're experiencing is a response to chemical changes in your body. So let's understand what's going on so that then we can know how to deal with it.
Absolutely. Excellent summary. I think we're going to hit all of these points. We're going to dive into some of this. We will give a little disclaimer first, Cynthia. You are not a physician. You are not a therapist, but you are a patient advocate, and you're very knowledgeable. And you worked with a lot of professionals while you were writing this book, and you did a lot of interviews. So I would love to hear a little more about your research and what that process looked like.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. My first career was as a journalist. My second career as a management consultant. What both of those required that I do was ask a lot of questions, gather information from other people who were experts, synthesize it in a way that made sense, and tell a good story. And that's what I tried to do with The Big Ordeal. I started by talking to other cancer patients. And as I was talking to cancer patients, I was also doing a lot of PubMed is a great resource for anyone who is, research inclined and scientifically minded. I did a lot of research on PubMed, which is a government database of published articles in medical journals. And I found that there were these patterns, and that people have been known about these emotional patterns for decades. I don't know why we don't recognize that in the general public, but certainly the scientific community does. And as I started uncovering more and more of the patterns, then I started asking myself and my medical team, well, why? What's going on that causes this? And they didn't have the answers. And so that forced me to broaden my network and ask questions of more and different experts. And so I spoke with oncologists, and then I spoke with psychologists, psychiatrists. And eventually I made my way to a neuroscientist. And I was at a luncheon for Joan Tabak Frankel, who's here today, and that luncheon was up at the Bronx Botanical Gardens, and I'm sitting in the beautiful gardens, conducting an interview with a neuroscientist up in Boston, and he started talking about these things called cytokines, which we'll talk more about later. And it's like, the light bulbs were just going off in my head, because all of a sudden I was understanding what was going on and why what was going on was happening. And that was a long way from where I had started, but also a long way to where I needed to go. But that was when I felt like, okay, there is an explanation. We can understand this and communicate it, and therefore help a lot of people move forward. And that's when I really started getting excited about the book.
The aha moment of putting the pieces together, and you knew what new questions to start asking. I think that makes perfect sense. Okay, so we will get back to the cytokines, but before we do, I think you've alluded to, or you said that cancer is inherently an emotional experience. In the book, you talk about a couple of these different factors that are both internal and external that are going on that really contribute to that, and is part of what leads to these patterns. Can you talk us through a couple of those forces and how they come into play?
Yeah. On the external side, we have the fact that for millennia, a cancer diagnosis was a death sentence. It just was. People said, you have cancer. Go get your affairs in order. You've got 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. And that history stays with us. We've all heard those stories. It's been baked into the, literature that we've read, the television and movies that we've seen. It's just, the histories of, relatives that have gone before us. It is just a fact that cancer has been a death we universally respond with a stress response and an assumption that that we're going to die. Another thing that makes it really emotional is that you have to go from this point of knowing nothing to being able to make a decision about your healthcare in a really compressed period of time, during which there's a great deal of uncertainty, because when you hear the words, you've got cancer, you don't know what kind, how advanced, how aggressive, you know, nothing. You just know that you have this really scary thing happening to you and you need to deal with it right away. And that makes it so much harder than, you know, somebody saying, well, you had a heart attack, or, you know, you've had a brain hemorrhage. I mean, there's so many things about, so much uncertainty about it, that it's, that adds to the anxiety. Another factor is that even if the diagnosing doctor is somebody that we've known for a long time, in my case, the gynecologist who delivered my babies, who are now, you know, 28 and 30, that wasn't the doctor who was going to treat me. So we almost always have to have a new relationship with our care team at the time of a cancer diagnosis. So those doctors don't know us. We don't know them. We haven't had the opportunity to establish the kind of dialogue that would allow us to say, but doctor, I'm feeling isolated and confused, or I am so depressed, or, you know, how do I get up in the morning and deal with this? Because that's not that's not what the relationship is yet. And I think another factor is that we don't, as a society, talk about mental health. And so we're uncomfortable talking about it to ourselves. We're uncomfortable talking about it to those that we love. And friends and family who want to be supportive don't know how to talk about that either. So all of that's going on externally. At the same time, internally, our body is changing. And whether it is because of the cancer, or because of the treatment, or because of the surgery that we're going through, there's so many physiological changes happening in our bodies at the time of cancer. Cancer itself causes physiological changes that influence our emotions. Not to mention just the fatigue of recovery from surgery, from radiation, from chemotherapy, which makes it harder for us to be resilient and get over these emotional hurdles that are being thrown at us. So it's a really complex situation, and lots of different things conspire to make it a very emotional time for us.
Absolutely. I think you talk so eloquently about all these different things that maybe we, you know, as patients are experiencing, but it's so hard to kind of take yourself out of it and see it from sort of a higher level. So I think that the way that you synthesize all of that is just so impressive and reassuring, I think, for a lot of people to hear. We are going to do a little brief detour into the science. We won't get too sciencey, but Cynthia, you have mentioned the cytokines, which I think I'm saying that correctly. But that is really sort of one of these big internal factors that's at play. Is that right?
It is, and it's something that, you know, I had never heard of before. I started doing this research. Cytokines have been in the news related to COVID, and so you may have heard of a cytokine storm, which can cause somebody to rapidly decline if they have a severe case of COVID. Cytokines are proteins that the immune system releases to communicate about what's going on in our bodies. And there are a bunch of cytokines that are pro-inflammatory, and then a bunch that are anti-inflammatory. And those cytokines need to stay in balance in order for us to feel healthy. But when you get a paper cut, cytokines are released into your body to tell your white blood cells, hey, there's an opening over here. We don't want an infection. Send some white blood cells over there to that paper cut. They're also released to say, send some platelets there. We got to heal up that wound. And then as the wound is healing and there's no sign of infection, the anti-inflammatory cytokines get released to say, okay, go back to normal. So if a paper cut releases cytokines, just imagine what a radical hysterectomy, for instance, might do to you. cancer in and of itself is causing a release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Radiation, chemotherapy cause cytokines to be released. The death of cancer cells as those treatments are working causes pro-inflammatory cytokines to be released. Some immunotherapies actually are cytokine therapies. So our body is getting bombarded by pro-inflammatory cytokines. And what was so interesting to me was to understand that not only is this happening at the physical level, but those cytokines have the ability to go through the blood-brain barrier. And by transferring into our brain, they send signals to the brain to say, you better go back to bed, because if that lion starts chasing you across the prairie here, you're in trouble. So it's that signal to the brain to go back to bed, that you're not well, that overwhelms us and causes not only the desire to climb back under the covers and pull the covers over your head, but causes depression and fatigue and so many of the other emotions that are part of the cancer experience are driven by this massive influx of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And it's only by regaining some balance that those emotions can get back under control. There's even research now that is suggesting that a lot of cognitive issues that we all experience, whether you want to call it chemo brain or cancer-related fatigue or whatever, those cognitive impacts are also coming as a result of the stress and the cytokine increase that are felt in the brain as a signal to shut down. Of course, that makes it hard for us to make decisions. It makes it hard for us to cope. It makes it hard for us to get up and do what we need to do with our treatment, in addition to getting on with our daily lives. Eventually, there's a physical recovery, and then we re-achieve homeostasis in the body, and we get that psychological recovery as well as that physical recovery. But it's hard, and we're fighting against our own bodies in order to try to reestablish that emotional balance.
Absolutely. I think, everything that you're saying about these external forces, the internal forces, this is a commonality. This is part of the cancer experience, and it is in no way a sign of weakness or anything like that. And I think you do such a great job in the book of hitting that point home. But I just wanted, is there anything else that you would say on that front in terms of this being a shared experience?
Well, I think that there is sort of a predictable flow of emotions, and that it is nearly universal. I mean, not 100% universal, because we are all very different, and our different DNAs can influence how we experience things. Our history, our prior exposure to trauma, whether it was physical or emotional trauma, can influence how we experience and can influence sort of the stress response that our bodies release. And so, there are differences, but the commonalities are that nearly 70% of patients report feeling incredible stress and anxiety. 60% experience cognitive issues, experience fatigue, both during and after treatment. Now, most of us manage to keep it just at a fatigue and anxiety and clearly not well level, but 15 to 20% experience depression, 10 to 15% experience post-traumatic stress disorder that prevents them from ever sort of stepping back into their normal lives. And those are documented patterns in all sorts of medical literature. That's not my research. That's borrowing from others. So the patterns are very real, and the expectation of cancer being an emotional experience is very real. And so I just encourage us all to recognize that it's not a weakness. It's not you. It's cancer.
Yes, Absolutely. I think that's such an important message. You alluded a little bit to these patterns, and I think you have a chart to share with us on this front. So we'll
I
have you
do.
share
And
your
so let's
screen.
see if we can make that
It's
that
always the
work.
tech moment. Yay, looks like
Did it
it's
work?
working.
All right.
So talk us through this. I think this is really interesting to see both, see it laid out this way.
So, again, this is a typical experience. Not everyone experiences everything that's here. But I want to point first to the orange and pink roller coaster that's going through here. Orange represents fear, and that fear is very high at the very beginning when we first have a diagnosis and we hear the words, "You've got cancer." For many of us, we feel a little less fearful once we've finally made that decision. The fear can increase as we start treatment because we don't know what exactly that treatment is going to be or do for us. It's hard to keep it under control during treatment, during testing and anxiety. Of course, if our cancer progresses or we're moving towards end of life, it increases yet again. And then as we end treatment and we achieve both physical and emotional recovery and are convinced that our cancer is not coming back, it can begin to diminish and finally recover. At the same time, we're experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety. And that stress actually tends to peak whenever we have a decision to make. And then again, during testing and monitoring, scanxiety is a common experience. And then again, at end of lifetime, when we're wondering, have I done all that I can do to make my passing both appropriate for me and appropriate for my family? So again, a very stressful time. Those two roller coasters go, up and down throughout. But then there are other emotions that we experience at various times. Obviously, at the time of diagnosis, we all experience shock and disbelief. Just, how can it be happening to me? Even among people who have a family history of cancer, it is still not uncommon to say, how can it be happening? But I did everything right. I took care of myself. I don't smoke. Why is this happening to me? At decision-making time, we also experience that sense of information overload where we just have to go, as one patient said, from 0 to PhD in a matter of days. And also a sense of hyper-efficiency. Many people sort of kick into a let me manage my way through this time period. And it's usually a relatively short, compressed time period where we have to be hyper efficient, but also where we somehow find a way to get to use our stress and anxiety to get through that decision-making process. When we start treatment, as I said, many of us feel relieved that finally somebody is looking at us and we're dealing with the cancer. But that's also when we begin to feel that sense of tremendous isolation of, oh my God, look what I have to go through. Nobody could possibly understand what I'm going through. And now I'm giving over my life to cancer. I used to have a sense of control in my life, but now I'm giving everything up because cancer is telling me when I'm having my surgery, when I'm having my chemo, my radiation, my days are not my own now. Everything belongs to cancer. We do get used to that loss of control in our lives as treatment continues, and we begin to see the patterns in our treatment and our response to treatment. But during ongoing treatment, that's when the fatigue really builds, when depression can set in, when we begin to have cognitive impairment, when we often suffer identity crises as we no longer look or think or feel or act the way we think of ourselves. And it just a tremendous sense of helplessness as we're going through treatment, and the concern about, is my cancer really gone? Is it going to respond to treatment? That I have no ability to control that. Testing and monitoring, both during treatment and after treatment, is a time when that fear and stress and anxiety come back for almost all of us. There was one woman I interviewed who had gynecologic cancer, and her major test was the CA-125 test. And for 5 years, she plotted her CA-125 logarithmically. So she would, when she knew the test results were available, she said she would pour herself a scotch. Then she would log into the hospital website and take a sip of the scotch before looking at the results, and then plot the results and see whether it was up or down, or how minute a change it was from the last time. And only after she had plotted it, be able to either gulp the rest of that scotch in fear or sip it in relaxation that everything was okay. And of course, we all know the CA-125 is a stupid measure that catches all sorts of stuff that has nothing to do with our cancer. But that was what she hung on to. Not uncommon at all.
I was going to say, I think the Scotch anecdote is just a very perfect example of this. Exactly. I mean, everybody has those types of things. I have to say,
yes. Yes. We all do. Many of us are able to skip over the recurrence, progression, and end of life phase, but many of us stay in that phase for a really long time. Anger and sadness are incredibly strong emotions for people who are dealing with a recurrence or a progression of the cancer. And that anger can be directed at the medical team, at the world, at oneself, at everyone who is trying to help you. It's hard because at that moment, we feel yet again as though the world has done an injustice to us because our cancer hasn't responded the way it's supposed to. And just incredible sadness overcomes many patients then, because they feel like I'm never going to be able to get back to some semblance of normalcy. How am I ever going to compensate for the loss that I've experienced as a result of this recurrence? If in fact the cancer further progresses towards end of life, there is a tremendous sense of frustration that, here's where I'm finding myself. And there's enormous guilt that I didn't do enough. Maybe I should have done more, not just as it relates to cancer, but as it relates to everything in life. Now that I'm facing the end, I'm guilty that I didn't, love my daughter more, communicate better with my husband, take better care of my mother, whatever it is. That's when the guilt starts to come up, along with a sense of loss of purpose. Why am I even here? What is this all worth? And tremendous helplessness. And, there have been all sorts of research done on, the 7 stages or the 6 stages of coming to terms with death, and anger and denial and acceptance and bargaining. And those things don't necessarily happen in any sort of a sequence, but they do happen. We do release that anger. We do, live for a period of time in denial. We do eventually find acceptance, although that acceptance can often happen at a time that is different than those around us get there. And I think that's one of the hardest times of cancer within a family, is that not everyone's on the same page at the same time as we move towards end of life. If, however, we're lucky enough to be able to skip over that period and we get to end of treatment, for many people, it's a confusing time, because we think, well, we should be happy now. We're done with our cancer treatment. But in fact, the most common experience at that point is a tremendous sense of loss, because that's when we can finally experience all of the emotions, allow ourselves to let the guard down and experience all of the emotions associated with what we've been through in the past several months or years. But also, we feel like we're being cut loose by our medical care team and not entirely sure who's going to be watching us, and who's going to know if my cancer is back, and who am I now, and who's going to be my friends, because my friends assume that I'm fine now that my treatment is over, and I'm anything but fine. So they're not really there for me, and my medical team isn't there for me, and everybody's ready for me to get on with my life, but I don't feel like I'm ready to get on with my life. So it's a really confusing time for a lot of people. And then after physical recovery, we eventually moved to emotional recovery, and somehow accepting what we've been through and incorporating what we've been through into our lives to declare that this is my new normal. And for many people, that also includes finding some sort of benefit out of the experience. Well, I learned that I can be resilient, or I learned that I am stronger than I thought I was, or I found a new direction for my life. One good friend of mine who had breast cancer a long time ago said that, it's not that cancer changed her. It just allowed her to be more so. It allowed her to remember who she was and what she valued in life and really focus on those things. And I know plenty of people that have dramatically changed their lives, myself included. I never intended to write a cancer book, but here I am volunteering and being a patient advocate and talking and writing about cancer. And I'm finding myself more fulfilled than I did in my years as a management consultant. And so that's a benefit to me from going through cancer. Not everybody feels that way. And a lot of people just want to say, okay, it's done. I'm over it. I'm going back to exactly what my life was before. And there's no need to change your life or not change your life. It's just those are two common ways of ending the cancer experience.
Absolutely. I think this chart is so informative. I think the way you lay it out, just even the little orange bubbles, I think I think to myself, like, oh yes, my hyper efficiency was reflected in the Excel spreadsheets that I was putting things like that, which perhaps is not shocking for people who know me, but yes, I think this is such an important understanding that is so helpful to have and so reassuring. You talked a little bit about coping and sort of this emotional recovery and how we kind of move on in certain senses or lean into it and learn something from it in others. What have you heard from your interviews? What have you experienced? Is there a right way to cope, or what are the best ways to cope? I think this is probably a really hard question to answer, but I'm going to ask it.
I think it's such an important question because there is no single best way to cope. The only right way to cope is the way that works for you. And that's hard because we want a short and easy answer. If I do this, it's going to work and I'm going to be better. And of course, that's never really the case. There are lots of different ways to cope. And for some people, they can only get through it by living in denial. And that's okay, so long as you know that you're living in denial and that there are some unresolved emotional issues, because sooner or later they're going to come back to haunt you. So, my way of coping was to take on a badass attitude. And, my doctor used to laugh at me and say, "You are just one hell of a badass cancer patient." Well, that worked because that allowed me to not deal with my fear. But then I still would break down and cry every morning in the shower because nobody could see that. So I could be badass to the outside world and tearful on the inside. But of course, my badass attitude probably meant that he never thought that I could benefit from women to women, and so didn't bother to tell me about it. So there are pluses and minuses to every way that we approach coping, and what works one day might not work the next day. What works for Nancy might not work for Robin. We're all different, and our experiences are different, and our experiences are different from day to day. That said, there are sort of three major categories of coping that it's helpful for us to be aware of. One is there are all sorts of ways of coping that relate to the body and sort of the physical act of coping by doing. And exercise is an example of coping by doing. We can get out there and run, and it gives us an endorphin response. It gives us a way of running away from our feelings. It gives us, just a change in psychology that makes it feel better. And for some of us, that works great. Another physical coping is to hug someone you love, or to laugh about a silly, cat video, or to actually pet your pet. All of those things are things that change our body chemistry by allowing a physical response to a physical activity. Even getting a good night's sleep and eating well can really help us with our physical coping. Some of us are cognitive copers, and we like to cope by making spreadsheets, by problem solving, by breaking the puzzle down into bite-sized pieces, by thinking through different ways to compartmentalize and manage the problem. And then there's a whole category of mind-body coping mechanisms, and that includes everything from mindfulness and prayer to yoga and tai chi and having a massage, things that sort of bridge the gap between a physical thing and something that is soothing or self-soothing while we're doing it. I started partaking in the knit one, purl one method of coping. As you sit there and knit, you are physically engaging your hands, so can't bite the fingernails, can't be doom scrolling, and you have to repeat to yourself, knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, or you screw up the pattern. And so it's a mindful way of shutting down that brain that just wants to go over and over and over and over again about how we're going to die. So we all have to find different ways of coping. And as I said, what works for me won't necessarily work for you. And the crying in the shower on one day and the being badass the next day is just a demonstration of how versatile our coping mechanisms need to be in order to get us through what really is an emotional roller coaster ride.
100%. I think I think in my own journey, I experienced such drastically different is what I'm trying to say, ways of coping. And I think that is a perfect illustration. We have about 15 minutes left, so I want to leave time for some questions if there are any. But one that I know, Cynthia, you had mentioned to me, just to sort of kick us off on frequently asked questions, was really about navigating the loss of intimacy that is such a huge factor when experiencing cancer. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll turn it over to the group for any additional questions.
Sure. I think that it's important to think about intimacy in two pieces, because we have multiple intimate relationships. Whether we are talking about physical intimacy or emotional intimacy, we are intimate with our partners, our family members, our dearest friends, and all of those intimate relationships get interrupted in one way or another because of the cancer and what we're experiencing, but also because of our tendency to withhold a little bit of information. And withholding that information, it may be we're not able to communicate how fearful we are. We're not able to communicate and help somebody else understand that, sense of isolation or that sense of chaos in our lives as we're going through this. Or maybe we try to explain it and we get some negative feedback, and that encourages us to withhold. But the more we withhold, the more the space between us and our intimate relations grows. And that emotional distance makes it then that much harder to close the physical distance when we're ready to re-engage. And I think that physical intimacy is a really challenging part of the recovery process for most cancer patients, but it's particularly hard for women who've gone through surgery that not only alters our external appearance, but alters our internal functioning. And whether you have vaginal stenosis as a result of radiation, or you have your ovaries removed, and therefore total change in the way your body feels internally, or you have radiation damage and neuropathy, and so your body feels different as people touch it. these things really complicate an already challenging time. And you have to build back the emotional connection in order to build back the trust before you can begin to experiment with the physical connection and find what's going to work for you again as a physical couple. And so it's I think a lot of people are hesitant to have those conversations because as the patient, you're not entirely sure that you're ready for physical intimacy again. As the loving partner to a patient, you don't want to be the one who is imposing your sexual desires on somebody who may still be recovering. As the patient, you don't know if your loving partner thinks that you're still sexually attractive. So there are all of these doubts that make it really hard to initiate that conversation. And yet until you feel good enough about yourself to initiate that conversation and begin to close that gap, the physical intimacy part is just going to be really hard.
I think that's so reassuring to hear. And I know Woman to Woman's been great about bringing in Molly to talk about some of these physical aspects, but the emotional piece is such a huge part of it too. So I'm glad we got to address that today a little bit. And I think that's a great place to turn it over to the group. I see a couple hands raised, so I'll just go ahead and call on people. I think Glenn, I think you were first.
You raise a really interesting point, which is that, how do we thread the needle with all of these different relationships that we have that allow us to get the support that we need from the friends and loving caregivers around us without always being a downer, without always putting ourselves in a position to be hurt and be let down. And, how do we know what we can say to each individual member of our circle in order to balance that out? And I think that just about everyone has reported being disappointed in a friend or family member who did not live up to expectations, myself included. And just about everyone has reported surprise at who came out of the woodwork in order to offer support and counsel. And the hard part is to know in advance who that's going to be. I was very disappointed in my brother, who I speak with pretty regularly. He didn't call me once during the entire 6 months I was undergoing surgery and chemo and feeling, at an absolute loss, who am I and what's going on? He didn't call me once. And I was so angry. But I've come to understand that it is a statement about who he is and what he is capable of doing, not a reflection of me and my needs. Now, yes, I was disappointed that he couldn't better meet my needs, but I recognized that it was him and not me that was the problem. And I think that's the important thing, is to understand that when somebody disappoints you, more likely than not, it's because of a limitation on their part, that either they fear cancer so much that they can't get their own fears under control enough to be able to be there for you, or that they lack the ability to be empathetic and therefore don't want to engage with you because they know that they can't do that for whatever reason. They can't do that because they are too close to you and view you as somebody who is the caretaker as opposed to being the one who needs care, or because they are limited in their emotional maturity themselves. Many people have done that and have just said, you know what, this is no longer somebody who's going to be in my inner circle. I'm not going to lose them entirely, but some people have a sense that, in order to respect our privacy, that they shouldn't call, they shouldn't be asking, they shouldn't be imposing. And, it's hard, it feels unfair as the patient who is already burdened with all of these treatments and emotions and everything that we're going through, to also then have to orchestrate our friends and family to behave appropriately. And it's a burden to think that we're the ones who have to be forgiving. But I think that it is part of the communication or lack of communication that comes with that sense of isolation. If we don't tell people what we expect of them, it's very hard for them to understand what we're going through and therefore be able to live up to our expectations, our silent expectations. And so, you know, many people respond well if we say, you know, I really have a hard time with you doing X, Y, and Z. Do you think you could do A, B, C instead? But we have to tell them. And if we don't tell them, it's sort of unfair to expect them to know. You know, my husband is not a great gift giver. He loves me dearly and he thinks about me all of the time. And I certainly couldn't have gotten through cancer without him. But every year at Christmas time, he'll ask me, well, what do you want for Christmas? And I said, no, you think about it, you figure it out. It's like, how is he supposed to know if he doesn't ask me? And, you know, it's the same thing with the support we want from our friends. How are they supposed to know if we don't tell them? And, you know, sometimes it's an unrealistic expectation.
I don't want to cut off this conversation too much, but because I think that's a great example, Cynthia, about the gift giving. I love that. My husband's the same way. But I think it's a great point. I do want to get at least one more question in here.
It's an excellent question. I think that, first of all, advocating for yourself is just critical because I always like to say, you know, your doctor may be the leading expert in XYZ, leading expert in you. You're the only one who knows what it feels like to be in your body and to be going through your particular cancer at this time. And the best way to ensure that you get the care that is right for you is to really partner with your care team. And that requires open communication. That requires saying, yeah, but this chemo is making me feel depressed, or this treatment gives me these miserable side effects, or I am struggling with my sense of identity right now. How can you help me? And so we tend not to advocate for ourselves with our doctors because we grew up in the era where, you know, the man in the white coat was the expert, and it was always a man, and he was always an expert, and we didn't ask questions. And I think now that, you know, there is a new way of being a patient, and it involves doing your homework. It involves asking lots of questions. It involves talking about yourself and what you're thinking and feeling, and therefore advocating for yourself. I have not been a political advocate for cancer or cancer research or whatever. What I am is an advocate for other patients. And so as I joined Women to Women and volunteer with other patients, I find it a tremendous benefit and healing act to be able to share with others what I have experienced and to help them find their voice in advocating for themselves with their professional care team, and being there to interpret and guide patients through the cancer process. I think that, you know, it goes back to what I was first saying. We don't talk about cancer enough, and we don't talk about emotions enough. So we certainly don't talk about cancer emotions. And by not only, you know, writing this book and trying to talk about the book in that way, I am also trying to talk about the themes of this with patients on a one-on-one level, and try to help patients be a little bit stronger in their own recovery by understanding what's going on in their bodies and how to advocate for themselves. The easiest way to find the book is to go to my website, thebigordeal.com, and there's a link right on the homepage. It'll take you right to the book on Amazon. You can also go directly to Amazon and search for The Big Ordeal by Cynthia Hayes. And it's available in other bookstores, you know, wherever books are sold.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. I will just add that we had links to both the Amazon page and your website, Cynthia, in the April calendar. So if you have that handy in your email, you can find it there. Otherwise, like Cynthia said, available wherever books are sold, which is very exciting. It has this lovely orange cover, so you can spot it really easily. Cynthia, thank you so much for this really just honest and refreshing conversation. I think this was really special and really nice to have a little bit more of an intimate discussion with the Woman to Woman family who you were already so supportive of.
Terrific. It was my pleasure. It's always my pleasure to be with you ladies. And thank you so much, Emily, for leading us in a very interesting conversation.